What we're going to be talking about today is the FMCSA's Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. But before I get into that, I'll just let you know a little bit more about me. So I've been working at DriverCheck for over a year now, and I've been focusing on all the ins and outs of drug and alcohol testing, as well as the DOT regulations, including the clearinghouse. And before DriverCheck, I spent a number of years as a safety coordinator with Greyhound Canada, which is a large bus company in North America. And I dealt with driver safety both off and on the road, including drivers' hours of service, workers' compensation, driver training, drug and alcohol testing, as well as road safety violations. So today we're going to be discussing the FMCSA's Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. And on the agenda, we've got the following items. So we're going to discuss what is the clearinghouse, what's the objective of the clearinghouse, clearinghouse reporting protocols, what information is the clearinghouse requesting, what's required to query or search a driver's information in the clearinghouse, how drivers will be notified of submissions to the clearinghouse, clearinghouse registration, as well as owner-operators, clearinghouse pricing, and an employer checklist. And in case you're wondering or looking for more information, you're going to want to click the very top link to take you to the FMCSA's clearinghouse website. This is where the clearinghouse is actually located. And they've got a bunch of frequently asked questions on there with answers, as well as the link to register your company and the link for any of your drivers that need to register for this as well. And then the other two links on here take you to DriverCheck's website, and it basically explains in a little bit more detail what DriverCheck can do for you as a client in terms of the clearinghouse. So what is the clearinghouse? Well, the clearinghouse is an electronic database. As you can see by the picture, it's going to be located somewhere down in the United States. So all the drivers' drug and alcohol violations that are DOT reportable will be sent electronically down to the United States and specifically to the FMCSA. And again, just a little bit about that. It's an online database containing all commercial drivers' drug and alcohol violations and return to work program documentation. And by all, I mean all FMCSA regulated truck drivers and bus drivers. It's also going to be an additional employer responsibility for background checks. So currently you're expected to ask your new hires, your new drivers, for their previous violations, if they have any, from their last employer. You're going to be expected to still do that, but you're also going to be expected to start doing that on your on your existing drivers, and you're going to have to do it annually. But we're going to get into that in a little bit. And employers are also going to be required to report violations into the database. Again, I'll go over that in a minute. And you're going to be querying any violations that are in the database. And querying is just a fancy word for search, in case you're wondering. And the most important bullet point on this slide is that the clearinghouse will be in place on January 6, 2020. That's the go live date. And in case anyone's wondering, this is a DOT regulation, and it's mandatory. It's not optional. If you are an FMCSA regulated trucking or bus company, you will be expected to follow this regulation and comply with it. So what is the objective of the clearinghouse? Well, the objective is to provide access to information, ensuring that drivers with drug and alcohol violations complete the necessary steps before getting back behind the wheel or performing any other safety-sensitive functions. And really why they're doing this, why the FMCSA is doing this, is to close an identified gap that results in job hopping and non-reporting by drivers. So currently, the current situation is a driver can have a violation with company A, and they also work for company B, but what company A knows, they might have a positive drug result, but that driver doesn't necessarily go and tell company B. So the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, and that creates a liability issue for company B that has no idea what's going on with that driver. So there's also the case where a driver will just simply quit a company and go join a new company, and they'll cover up their previous drug and alcohol violations. So this clearinghouse regulation is intended to close that situation. It's gonna remove that, and because it's removing that that gap, it's removing that kind of loophole. This is going to result in an increase in compliance with drug and alcohol testing requirements. So you're going to see a lot more drivers doing the return to work program. They're going to be going through substance abuse professionals, and they are going to be doing more return to duty tests. And the other option, the unfortunate option for us in Canada, is you may see a number of drivers just drop out of the DOT world altogether and go into different industries. So that is another issue we're identifying. This might eliminate some of the driver workforce. So what is the objective of the clearinghouse? And this is just continuing on with the previous slide. So once there's 3 years of data violation stored within the clearinghouse, so this is January 6, 2023, employers will no longer be required to request information from the driver's previous employer. However, until January 2023, you're going to be expected to do a previous background check on your new hires, as well as query the clearinghouse for those new drivers, as well as your existing driver base, your existing driver pool. The only exception to this, so this is after 2023, any drivers who have been identified within the clearinghouse that are currently in a follow-up testing program, you as an employer are going to have to reach out to that driver's previous employer and request the follow-up testing plan directly from them. And the reasoning for that is the follow-up testing plan won't be in the clearinghouse database, and you will actually need that as the new employer to help that driver complete that follow-up testing plan. And depending upon the success of the FMCSA's clearinghouse, the DOT, as the parent organization, the DOT will expand this program to their other agencies. So right now it's strictly the FMCSA, but the DOT might expand that to the FTA or the FAA, perhaps the United States Coast Guard. So these are the airlines, the transit authority, like the public transit authorities, and things like that, the railways. So there is a potential for expanding this to the other industries as well. So who's going to report to the clearinghouse? Well, employers are going to be expected to report to the clearinghouse, as well as the following service agents. So medical review officers, those are those doctors that report drug test results, as well as substance abuse professionals, again, those individuals helping the drivers that have had a violation go through the return to duty process, as well as consortium third-party administrators like DriverCheck. And TPAs, we help employers to fulfill the obligations of the DOT regulations. So just going to expand a little bit on reporting protocols to make it a little bit more clear on who's reporting what and what their timeline is. So an MRO, the medical review officer, will have to report verified positive, adulterated, or substituted drug test results within 2 business days of making that verification. So they make a determination on a Monday that somebody was in fact positive for a substance. They will have till the end of business day on Wednesday to report that to the clearinghouse database. And then as an employer, you're going to be expected to report positive alcohol violations. So that's where somebody's blown 0.04 or higher on a breath alcohol test, as well as knowledge violations. So that includes things like where a driver gets a citation from a police officer for being, under the influence of drugs or alcohol. You're also going to have to report negative return to duty tests and the successful completion of all follow-up testing. So just to be a little bit clear on that, negative return to duty test is done after somebody's had a positive violation and needs to go see a substance abuse professional. And that goes for the follow-up tests as well. And all of that information will have to be reported to the clearinghouse by the close of 3rd business day. So if something happens on a Monday, you're going to have till the end of business day Thursday to report that to the clearinghouse. As for substance abuse professionals, or SAPs, they must submit the driver's ID and their date of initial assessment with the substance abuse professional, as well as the driver's successful completion of treatment and eligibility for return to duty testing by the following business day. Now, they've got a little bit tighter turnaround. Main reason being that this is when you go to see a substance abuse professional, it's because the driver's had a violation and they've been removed from active DOT driving until they've had a negative return to duty test. So the substance abuse professionals are on a bit tighter timeline because they're expected to get or help get a driver back to duty and back on the road quickly. And then last but not least, consortium third-party administrators like DriverCheck will be expected to report as if they were the employer. So DriverCheck is a TPA, and if we're working on an employer's behalf, we're going to be expected to do whatever you are required to do. So we'll have 3 business days. DriverCheck's a little unique because we also have MROs contracted out as well. And so for the MRO function, we're going to have 2 business days to report a positive drug test result. So who has access to the clearinghouse exactly? Well, there's a number of different entities, but the main ones are going to be employers, TPAs like DriverCheck, drivers themselves. They'll be able to access their own individual record, as well as state authorities like police agencies and licensing, state licensing authorities. And why I say state there and not province is because Canadian jurisdictions have not been given access to use this clearinghouse database. So it's strictly US enforced. So like Michigan State Police could technically access it, but somebody like a police force like the Ontario Provincial Police, they wouldn't be able to access it. Just so that's clear, it's US focused because it is an American law. And then another entity that will be accessing it will be the National Transportation Safety Board, otherwise known as the NTSB. Again, this is a US agency, and they investigate major collisions within the US on US roadways. And so if there happens to be a fatal or major collision involving a DOT driver, the NTSB will be using the clearinghouse to check if that driver has a record on file for drug and alcohol violations. Now, last little point there. So medical review officers and substance abuse professionals, they actually won't have access to the clearinghouse. They're only going to be able to have the ability to report to. So MROs and substance abuse professionals, they're going to have an account in the clearinghouse, but they're not actually going to be able to go and look up a particular driver or go and look up a particular company. They're only going to be able to report violations. They're going to put in, whatever, Johnny Be Good had a positive drug test. That they're going to put that in there, and that's simply it. They're not going to be able to go look up information. So on this slide, we've got petitions to correcting information. So this one, just so you know, a petitioner could be technically anyone involved with the drug and alcohol testing program, but it's mainly geared towards drivers and their employers. And what this petition allows drivers and employers do is to basically challenge information that's been reported inaccurately to the clearinghouse. So if let's say a medical review officer's reported Johnny's test results as being positive in the clearinghouse when they're actually meant to be for Eric, well, that's inaccurate. The test results belong to a different individual. So you'd be able, as a driver or as an employer, to challenge that result and say, hey, wait a second, that result wasn't reported correctly. Now, what you can't do as a petitioner is challenge the accuracy of the test results themselves. So if the drug test result or the alcohol test result were in fact positive, you can't challenge that under the clearinghouse regs. Basically, you can only challenge if it's been reported incorrectly, not challenging the validity of the testing itself. So just going into a bit more on information required by the clearinghouse to enter or report results, you're going to need to have a bit of variety of information. So like, let's say you're an employer and you need to report on positive alcohol test, you're going to need to know the date of the test. You're going to need to know the driver's full name, so that's their first and last name, and how it's legally spelled on their commercial driver's license. You're also going to need their date of birth. You're going to need their commercial driver's license number itself, along with the issuing province or state. You're also going to need to know the employer's name. I'm assuming as an employer, you're going to know your company's name. You're also going to need the your US DOT number. So if you have a US DOT number, you're going to have that for reporting results. Also, the date of a verified test result, if that happens to be a drug test. You're also going to need the reason for the testing, so that it could be a post-incident test. It could be a testing was for random, like they've been randomly selected for a test, as well as what's the other one here? Reasonable cause. Sorry, reasonable cause. I was drawing a blank there. Sorry. But you're also going to have to report test results themselves. So negative return to duty test results, positive test results, refusals to test, adulterated test results, as well as substituted test results. Now, I just want to be clear here on test results. Negative test results do not get reported, with the exception of a negative return to duty test result. All right. So if somebody had a post-incident and they had a negative result in that post-incident test, that doesn't get reported. Only somebody that has had a positive violation and has to go into a substance abuse program and then they have to do a return to duty test, only at that time would a negative return to duty test result be reported into the clearinghouse. And that's to help them clear their, well, not clear the record, but help them return to the road and get back into DOT driving. So how will drivers be notified of submissions to the clearinghouse? Well, they're going to be notified anytime information about them is entered, revised, or removed. So if somebody enters a positive test result or removes that test result, the driver's going to be notified. The driver's also going to be notified when information has been released to an employer. And we're going to get into this in a couple of slides down the road here, but drivers are going to actually have to provide consent to do any of this. And if they don't consent, there's also ramifications for that. But the notification, and this is one kind of makes me giggle, but the notification that's going to be sent to drivers is going to be done through US letter mail, so the US Postal Service. And they're going to be delivering the notification to the driver's address as it appears on the record, which comes from their commercial driver's license number. Sorry, the commercial driver's license. And one issue with that is it can take a long period of time before a driver becomes aware of something being entered onto the record. Now, the DOT did recognize that that's a bit of an issue, so how they've addressed it is a driver can actually register themselves on the clearinghouse and provide an email address. So if any information gets entered for that particular driver, if that driver's provided their email address, they're going to get the notification via email, and that's going to be a lot more instantaneous. They're going to get it probably within a matter of minutes, if not seconds. So there is a little bit of a workaround there. And then last but not least, drivers will also have to register in the clearinghouse if they want to access their own information. And I'm going to go over driver registration in a few slides. So what is required to query driver's information in the clearinghouse? Well, employers must obtain signed driver consent forms to perform what's called a limited query in the clearinghouse. And I'm going to go over limited queries in a minute. But basically, you have to do this limited query on an annual basis for each one of your current drivers. And what you're going to do is get that driver or all your drivers to sign either electronically or in written form a limited consent form that basically states something to the effect that I'm authorizing my employer to check the FMCSA's clearinghouse for any drug and alcohol violations I may have. And depending on how you set up the consent form, you can have it worded in a way that allows you to do more than more than one check per year, or allows you to have the consent signed just once, and it's good for the duration of that driver's employment. So you can word it so like, okay, I give my employer the ability to search the FMCSA clearinghouse for the duration of my employment. That way you don't have to go back every single year and get the driver to sign a new consent every single year, because that is a little bit of a waste of time. And the DOT's allowed it that you can set it up for an extended period of time. Now for what's called a full query, and again, I'll get into that in a second, but for a full query, this is actually going to be done, the consent piece is going to be done right through the FMCSA portal. You're going to have to go right into the Clearinghouse website, and the driver will have to agree to a consent online through that portal. And a full query would be done for all pre-employments, as well as following a notification during a limited query. And again, I'll go over this into more detail in just a second. So a limited query, and again, a query is just fancy word for saying search. A limited query needs to be done at minimum once a year on all your existing FMCSA regulated drivers. So if you've got 50 existing drivers, you're going to have to do 50 queries on each one of those drivers. Sorry, I don't mean 50 queries on one driver, but 50 different queries to cover off all your drivers. And what this limited query allows you as an employer to see is whether or not one of your drivers has an outstanding violation on their file. And it'll let you see if they've even had a violation and gone through the return to duty process. And I'm actually just going to back up that statement. What the limited query will actually show you is just an initial notification of whether or not information exists on the driver's file. What I started to explain there was actually the full query. So the limited query will pop up and say John Doe has more information on his file, but it won't actually tell you anything specific. So then you know for that particular driver whether or not something exists. If a driver's file comes back saying nothing exists on the driver, you're good to go because that driver doesn't have anything in your database. So again, what this requires for the limited queries to be able to do this is you have to get each one of your existing drivers to sign a limited query consent form. And this is something DriverCheck has set up. We've set it up electronically that if you're going to be using us for the clearinghouse services, we'll be able to send each one of your drivers this limited query consent through either email or text message, and the driver will be able to agree to that consent, and we'll track it and keep a log of it. That way we can do the do the queries for you. So just a bit more onto full queries. So if a limited query shows that information exists on a particular driver, the employer will be expected to obtain the driver's specific consent to conduct a full query. This is actually a requirement. So if a driver's got a file on record with the clearinghouse, you're going to get a notification of that, and then you're going to be expected to dig into that file deeper to see exactly why the driver has a file and what that file says. And as an employer, you're going to be expected to conduct this full query within 24 hours from the time a limited query displays that more information exists. And the 24-hour rule is right in the regulations. And so if a driver doesn't go onto the clearinghouse within 24 hours of you doing the initial search and he doesn't provide his consent, you're actually going to have to remove the driver from active DOT driving. You're not going to be allowed to let him perform any more safety-sensitive functions in a DOT capacity. I know that's going to be a bit of a burden, a bit of a challenge for those drivers that are on the road and cannot be connected with easily, but you will have to manage it in a way that the driver's next check-in point, whether it's a hotel or some roadside stop, that there's some way, some method of communication of getting a hold of him and letting him know he needs to go onto the Clearinghouse website and let you perform a search of his record. So that's where a limited query turns into a full query. So that's one method where the full query comes up. The other method where a full query comes up is for pre-employment. So all pre-employment or new hires will have to have a full query done on them of the clearinghouse. And again, a full query requires the driver to go onto the clearinghouse website, register themselves, and agree to the consent that's been provided by the FMCSA. So that should be done well ahead of the driver ever hitting the road. It's similar to a driver needing to have a drug test performed on them before they start performing DOT duties. The same applies here for all new hires. They have to have a clearinghouse full query search done on them before they're allowed to start performing DOT functions. So the driver, again, just reiterating it, the driver will have to provide electronic consent through the clearinghouse portal before releasing the information to the employer for full queries. And absent this consent, the employer may not permit a driver to perform safety-sensitive functions, such as the operation of a commercial motor vehicle. And I just want to point out a little note here. So if you're going to be using a TPA like DriverCheck to comply with the reporting duties of the regulations, the employer, so yourself, will retain the ultimate responsibility for ensuring that your TPA makes the required reports on your behalf. So you have to make sure, like if you're using DriverCheck, you have to make sure DriverCheck's actually reporting the results into the clearinghouse and doing queries for you. Because if anything needs to be investigated or audited, the DOT is going to be looking at the employer first, and it would be your TPA secondary. So the ultimate responsibility is on you as an employer. Now, a bit more on registration. So clearinghouse registration. So employers will be expected, all FMCSA regulated employers will be expected to register into the clearinghouse. And I've provided at the bottom of the slide here, I've provided a link to the FMCSA's employer instructions on how to register. So it's a nice like 20-page document, step by step, on how to register with the clearinghouse, and it was made directly by the FMCSA. So it's pretty much it holds your hand through the process pretty much. But I'll give a little warning because this isn't on the slide. But any of you that have an FMCSA portal account, you'll need to figure out that if you've forgotten the details to your FMCSA portal account, you'll need to figure out those details because you're going to need to use the FMCSA portal account to pre-populate a lot of the information into the clearinghouse when you're registering. And right now they've got about a 2 to 3 week delay on answering questions and getting help for the FMCSA portal account. Again, that's a little separate and a bit outside of the clearinghouse, but it is connected. So if you're registering and when you're registering, you're going to need the name of your company, the address and telephone number, as well as your US DOT number. If you don't have a DOT number, you're going to be requested to provide other information to verify your identity. So there are companies out there like temporary staffing agencies that kind of lease drivers out. That staffing agency will have to also register as an employer, and they'll have to have another method of verifying who they are because they don't have a DOT number, because they don't operate trucks themselves. So going on that, once you've registered your company, you're going to need to provide the name of the people you authorize to use the clearinghouse on your behalf. So if you've got your safety manager working on your behalf to run the clearinghouse for you, you're going to need to name that person as your designated staff member. And then each year that this clearinghouse is in place, each year you're going to have to verify those staff members that are working on your behalf. And the reason why you're verifying is to make sure that those employees are still working for you, or if unfortunately if somebody's passed away or been fired or something like that, you're going to want to make sure that they only have access if they need to. Also, once you're registered, if you're going to be using a TPA like DriverCheck, you're going to be expected to select that TPA from a list within the clearinghouse. And if You don't select the TPA, the TPA won't be able to do or perform the services for you on their behalf. So it's a good mental note to know that if you are using somebody like DriverCheck, that you do like select us as your TPA, okay? And then employers must update any changes to this information within 10 days. So you change your location or any of the staff that are in charge of this program for you, or your DOT number, whatever you change, you need to let the clearinghouse know within 10 days. So that was the clearinghouse, so the actual FMCSA registration. But DriverCheck's also got our own registration for this. So if you are going to be using DriverCheck, and I suggest you do, if you are going to be using DriverCheck, we've got a link there at the top for you to be able to go sign into our portal, our Amanda portal, and get registered with us. So once you sign into Amanda, you'll see a clearinghouse banner. It'll come up at the top of your web browser, and it'll have a sign up button. If you click that sign up button, it'll take you right into registration, and it's a 3-step process. It'll give you the terms and conditions of what you're agreeing to. I suggest you read through that. It'll also give you your estimated fees, and I'll go over what our DriverCheck fees are in a little bit, but it'll essentially give you pricing, what we're doing for you, and it'll ask for your authorization and your agreement for DriverCheck to work on your behalf. And starting in late November, so later this month, DriverCheck will be working with any of our clearinghouse clients to communicate things like the electronic consent link that'll go to drivers, as well as updated onboarding packages for your drivers, as well as we'll have some additional webinars and conference calls, as well as training sessions. So back to, we didn't really leave the topic, but clearinghouse registration continued. So for drivers, and this is a big question that comes up, will drivers need to register? Well, the short answer is no. Drivers don't actually need to register for the clearinghouse. However, a driver will need to register to provide electronic consent for prospective or current employer to conduct a full query. So if a driver is getting a new job, he's doing a pre-employment, he has to do a full query, and he will have to register for the clearinghouse. Also, if he gets a positive drug or alcohol violation, at some point he will have to register in order to provide his employer consent to search that file, because now he has a file on the clearinghouse. But the better way of thinking this, the alternate way of thinking of this, is that a driver will never have to register for the clearinghouse if they're currently employed with you before January 6th and they never have a positive drug or alcohol violation. So those existing drivers that you have are basically grandfathered into the system, and they won't ever have to touch this unless they get a violation or start a new job. There is one other way, though, to register. So if a driver wants to view their own record, even if they don't have anything on file, if the driver is just curious and wants to see see what the clearinghouse looks like, that driver can register in order to search their own file. Also, if the driver is going to be registering, the driver will need to provide their commercial driver's license number along with the issuing province or state, as well as their name and address as it appears on their driver's license. And the bottom there is just a link that'll take you or take the driver to an instruction booklet similar to what employers have. And the FMCSA has provided a step-by-step listing on how a driver can register in the clearinghouse. So just a bit about owner-operators, because owner-operators are a little unique under this new regulation. So owner-operators must designate a TPA like DriverCheck to comply with the employer reporting requirements of the clearinghouse. So if a driver gets a positive alcohol test or a citation, like a roadside citation for impaired driving, DriverCheck will be expected to report that violation on the behalf of the owner-operator. However, owner-operators will still be allowed to query their own their own file. So they'll still be able to do that annual cert for their own file. Now, the reason why the FMCSA is not allowing owner-operators to report their own violations is to prevent fraud and non-reporting of those violations, as well as not completing the return to duty process. Because if for whatever reason an owner-operator happens to have an addiction to a substance or alcohol, that driver, that owner-operator, is probably not going to report that violation. And so the regulations have set it up in a way that it's going to be mandated that the TPA report it, and there's no way around it. You got a violation, it's going into the clearinghouse. So an owner-operator, because they don't retain the ultimate responsibility here, it'll actually be downloaded onto the TPA. Again, this is for owner-operators. The TPA will be expected to report those violations for them. It's mandated that we report for them. So who else will be authorized to access the clearinghouse? Again, I listed the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, for accident investigations. That's a key one. Also, the FMCSA themselves. They're going to be using the clearinghouse a lot for reviewing the clearinghouse program, as well as for auditing purposes. And the key here is auditing purposes. Because there's going to be a centralized electronic database for drug and alcohol violations, the FMCSA is now going to be able to see whether or not a company has registered themselves and whether or not a company is allowing drivers with violations to go out on the road without completing the return to duty process. They're going to be able to see, also check in on TPAs like DriverCheck to see if, is DriverCheck doing what they're supposed to? Or is a medical review officer doing what they're supposed to? Are they registered, and are they legally doing what they're supposed to? So for auditing purposes, this is going to become a lot more effective for the DOT to do what they need to from an enforcement perspective. Also, state authorities, again, state authorities, not Canadian provincial authorities, but US state authorities will have the right to access information in the clearinghouse without a consent or a charge. And the reasoning behind that is it's already listed in the regulations that state authorities have the ability to help enforce laws, and it's legally mandated that drivers and employers and TPAs be compliant with the regulations. And one of the key ones there is that in the United States, the state Department of Motor Vehicles, the ones issuing the driver's licenses, they'll be searching this clearinghouse in order to see if drivers are hopping around from state to state trying to get a new driver's license issued in order to try and circumvent the clearinghouse database. So the US state authorities will be checking this. So if a driver does try to get a new license, they're actually going to connect that new license to that driver's clearinghouse record. So there really is no escape for that driver. And so on this slide, I'm just going to explain a little bit about substance abuse professional. This isn't direct, not completely related to the clearinghouse, but it's something I like to clear up with all employers, all of our clients. So an employer under the DOT regulations is not required to provide a substance abuse professional evaluation or any substance abuse professional recommended education or treatment. However, what they are expected to do as an employer under the DOT regs is make an employee aware of substance abuse professional services through a list. So if a driver gets a positive drug or alcohol violation, as an employer, you have to make that driver aware that, hey, here's a list of 5 substance abuse professionals within an hour's drive of our work location, and I suggest you seek out their help. That's all you're required to do. You don't actually have to pay for their evaluation or their treatment. However, going on that point, it's under the regulations, it's left up to employers and employees to decide amongst themselves if they want to pay for the services. So you might have a collective bargaining agreement or some employment contract where you've said as an employer, yes, you know what, I will pay for my drivers to get treatment. But that's something between you and your drivers. That's something that you've decided as an employer that you're willing and wanting to do. So just make sure you check that. And I'll say this from a human rights perspective, whatever you do for one employee, for one driver, you do for the other driver. So if you're going to pay for one driver, you pay for your other drivers. Don't set it up that you're favoring one or two drivers and setting yourself up for a human rights complaint later down the road. Right? And then drivers will also need to, and this is where it links back to the clearinghouse, drivers will need to assign their substance abuse professional in the clearinghouse. And the driver will need to register in the clearinghouse if they haven't already done so. So if a driver gets a positive drug or alcohol violation, they're going to go in, register themselves in the clearinghouse database, and then they're going to assign the substance abuse professional that they're going to be working with to get or to go through the return to duty process. So now we're going to go into clearinghouse pricing. So this pricing here that I'm going to be talking about, this is from the FMCSA. So employers are the only ones who get charged to query or search the clearinghouse database. And they're going to get charged by the FMCSA. They're going to get charged for limited and full queries. But thankfully, limited and full queries are both $1.25 US. And just a special note on that, where a limited, so let's say you're doing the limited query, more information comes up, and now you have to do a full query, you only have to pay once. You pay one-time fee of $1.25 for that limited query, and if it turns into a full query, again, you only get that one charge. And so how many queries are going to, should you purchase in order to fulfill the querying throughout the year? Well, you should plan to purchase enough queries to cover all your existing drivers, as well as any new hires you expect to have throughout the year. So you have 50 existing drivers, and you expect to also hire another five drivers throughout the year. You should purchase at least 55 queries, so you're good for the entirety of the year. Another good thing here is if you purchase one too many queries or you don't use as many queries as you expected, any unused queries will be carried forward to the following year. So you have, let's say, 2 queries left over at the end of the year. That'll get carried over to the next year, and they won't expire on you. So that's the good news. And if you're curious as to what the clearinghouse pricing plans look like, I suggest you click the link that's down on this slide, and it'll take you right to the FMCSA's querying plan. And you'll be purchasing these querying plans right through the FMCSA, and you're going to use their online ordering form, and you're going to make the purchase using like a credit card or a Visa debit card. But a special note here at the bottom, drivers do not get charged for using the clearinghouse. So a driver, unless they're an owner-operator, a driver will never be expected to be paying for the querying or the clearinghouse regulations. So now, just going a bit further, so I just talked about the FMCSA pricing. Now I've got on this slide DriverCheck pricing. So if you're deciding to go with DriverCheck, what DriverCheck is going to be charging is $1.75 per month per driver. Or sorry, I should say that $1.75 per driver per month. And what that's going to entitle you to is a limited query electronic consent done through Amanda, which I've already talked about. Will help your drivers do the consent electronically. DriverCheck will also archive limited electronic consents in Amanda. Will audit active lists of drivers before doing the annual check for the limited consent on file. We'll also communicate with the DERs, the designated employer representatives, if a limited query is missing, if a consent is missing prior to pulling that annual report. We'll also send a communication to the DER of any flags during a limited query check, and we'll do that verbally and through Amanda. So let's say we've just done the query, and someone comes back saying, yeah, driver John Doe's got a record on file. Well, as DriverCheck, we're going to contact you, and we're going to communicate that to you so we know what the next steps are. We're also going to archive the results of these queries for ease of access and future use. We're also going to have full query reporting following a limited query violation notification. Again, I've already touched on that, but basically we're going to get in touch with you, let you know what's going on and why the driver's got a record. We're also going to keep all these records on file for US DOT auditing support. So if the DOT comes knocking on your door and says, hey, I want to see your clearinghouse records, what do you actually have on file, what have you actually been doing, we're going to be able to help you out with that. There's also clearinghouse program support and guidance. So things like the 24-hour rule, we'll be able to help you with that, as well as other questions and concerns you may have as the clearinghouse goes on. And then we're also going to be reporting things like the positive alcohol test results, negative return to duty results, return to work program completion reports, refusals to tests, and actual knowledge violations. And so that's like a monthly fee, but we also have a $15 full query fee. So each full query we're charging $15 Canadian, and what's included with that is the full query test result from the clearinghouse database, as well as the communication with the designated employer representative via Amanda. That's our online portal for clean results. So if we did a search, let's say we're doing a pre-employment search and nothing comes back, the driver doesn't have a record in the clearinghouse, we're going to let you know through Amanda that, yep, this driver, he's good to go, he doesn't have a record. However, if the driver does come back and he's got a full record, it says, whatever, he's got a drug violation from a year ago and he hasn't done return to duty testing at all, we're going to let you know that verbally. We're actually going to call you and let you know verbally, and we're going to let you know through Amanda, through our online portal as well, and give you the next step and guidance on what to do. So how do we approach this driver? What do we do for him? Do we have to get him a return to duty test? Do we have to get him to go see a substance abuse professional? What's the next thing for us to do in order to get the driver back on the road, or remove him from service if he's actively driving? So I'm getting towards the end of the presentation here, but we do have an employer checklist. So phase one of this employer checklist, we highly suggest that you register with the clearinghouse, because the clearinghouse is open already. So you can go to the FMCSA's clearinghouse website today and actually register your company and select DriverCheck as your TPA if you're going to be using us. I also suggest that you register with DriverCheck itself. So go on to Amanda and register us again if you're choosing to use us, and make sure you get signed up. So that's two different registrations, one with the FMCSA and one with DriverCheck. I also suggest that you prepare to update your US DOT alcohol and drug policy to add the clearinghouse program to the policy. And you should give your drivers at least 30-day notification before the clearinghouse starts, or to any update to your clearinghouse policy, your US DOT policy, just to let them know, hey, this is what's coming down the road, and this is what's up, and why we're doing it, why it's happening. And then you should also get the drivers to sign off that they are in receipt of the policy edition. So if you update it with the clearinghouse, whether it's in the handbook or the policy itself, you should be getting the drivers to sign off saying, hey, I recognize and understand that my employer has informed me of this, and I know what's expected. And then phase two of the employer checklist. So once you've registered and you know what's going on with the clearinghouse, you should be adding pre-employment clearinghouse queries to your onboarding process. So now, as an additional step in your onboarding process for FMCSA drivers, you should be noting in there like, okay, hey, I gotta remember not only to do the drug test, but I gotta remember to go into the clearinghouse database and do a search of this driver's records. So you've got to make sure you're doing this before that driver starts performing DOT functions. So you can set it up where it falls on your priority list, depending, how you're going to look at it. But again, it's got to be done before the driver hits the roads and starts driving for you. You should also provide additional training for your internal staff. So you should update your onboarding packages. You should do some webinars and conference calls, and as well as some training sessions. So you should be letting your safety managers or safety supervisors know what's going on and training them up on how this is going to be followed through with. And you should also be letting your drivers know. Give your drivers a little training session and say, hey guys, this is what's happening, and this is when it's going to take effect, and this is why we're doing it. That way no one's caught off guard, and no one tries to to pretend they didn't know what was going on. You've got to be clear up front. Also, you should purchase a querying plan in the clearinghouse. Again, I already provided the link, but there's the link again. Go to the clearinghouse website and see what querying plan works the best for your company and what your what your driver roster looks like and what you expect to hire throughout the year. And then starting in 2020, you're going to get all of your active drivers and new drivers to provide consent for limited queries. So you should do this before the limited query check is performed. So you don't have to have all your drivers sign a consent by January 6th for the limited query, but they must sign that form at some point before the year of 2020 is over, before the entire year is over. So if you might choose to do the limited query in June, so long as you get the drivers to all sign the consent form before the June query is done, you're good to go. You just have to make sure that the queries are done before you do the query at the clearinghouse. And then be prepared to remove a driver from service when consent isn't provided for the clearinghouse. So if a driver's absolutely refusing, like let's say the 24-hour rule, you're like, oh, okay, I've done the limited query and see that you've got more information on your file, and now your driver's giving you a little bit of a hissy fit for whatever reason. He's like, no, he's adamant he's not going on the clearinghouse, doesn't want to participate in this. Well, once the 24 hours is gone by and he hasn't provided consent, you're going to stand him down for DOT driving purposes. And then last point here, you should also develop a plan for managing a driver that's had a violation notification during a limited query. And again, that goes with the potential for out of service. A plan on how you're going to approach that driver to remove him from service. But that should already be something part of your process for when a driver's had a positive post-incident test result. So you should already have something pretty much to the effect of how to remove a driver from service. So now we're on to the question phase, and I'm going to have my coworker here ask some questions that were listed on the chat during the webinar, and I'll try to answer them as best I can.
Okay, so state police have access to the information from Clearinghouse. So why don't they have the ability or requirements to submit a roadside test?
That is because the roadside tests done by the state police forces aren't DOT roadside tests. That's their own enforcement. The driver would be, now that driver is going to get a citation, most likely if they're positive. And so if they get the citation from the driver, that'll go back to the employer. Like the driver will have to make the employer be notified. And the way the regulations are set up for the clearinghouse is now that employer has a knowledge violation for that driver, and it becomes incumbent upon the employer or their TPA, like DriverCheck, to report that knowledge violation to the clearinghouse. So basically, the clearinghouse regulations didn't put this reporting aspect onto state authorities. They put the reporting aspect onto MROs and onto employers and TPAs. So I hope that answers your question.
Is this for US drivers only?
So yeah, this is for US drivers only, and specifically only those FMCSA regulated drivers, so like the trucking and bus industry that go across the border into the United States. So it's not going to apply to your Canadian, so if you have a strictly Canadian driving workforce, it won't apply to them unless, of course, they jump over into your US DOT driving pool. Right?
Are the registration or query forms available in French for the drivers?
Yes, we will have the consent forms prepared in French. And now, just a note here, DriverCheck set it up so we can have it in French, and that's great. I think that's great, especially under Canadian laws. We should have things listed in English and French. But under the DOT regulations, if that driver had to go onto the FMCSA Clearinghouse website and do a full query consent for the FMCSA, that full query consent is only going to be in English, and the drivers, any DOT drivers, expected to know English because that's the official language of the United States. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't think the U.S. actually has an official language, although it's widely known that English is the language of the United States. Again, DriverCheck's trying to help you out, and we're providing French consent forms for the limited queries, but the full queries are through the FMCSA, and they're only going to be in English.
How do you define an owner-operator?
So for an owner-operator, and I've tried to seek some clarity from the FMCSA, but what they've listed it as is somebody that owns the trucking or bus company and also drives for that company and has 0 to a handful of drivers. Now, that's kind of open-ended in my opinion, and that's why I sought clarity from the FMCSA, but they didn't really clear it up too much for me. So how we're defining it is a single owner, not single owner, single operator, and they're also the owner. So one driver, one owner kind of situation. It's basically a one-man show, and they've got their own DOT running authority. They've got their own DOT number. So if I know this situation comes up, there are what people consider owner-operators that go and work for another company. If they're running your vehicles under your DOT number, and you're sending them for things like a drug test, and you're sending them for random selections, they're going to fall under your responsibility as well. Okay, so there's a little bit of guidance from me on that.
Should queries be purchased in addition to being a DriverCheck client?
Sorry, can you state the question again?
Should they purchase queries in addition to being a DriverCheck client?
Yes, I would suggest they purchase queries. You're going to have to purchase queries as an employer despite DriverCheck, so you have to do that. But if you're going to be using DriverCheck as well, and I suggest you do, then you're also going to have to register with DriverCheck. Now, DriverCheck cannot purchase querying plans for you. That's your responsibility in the clearinghouse, because the way the FMCSA set it up is that the clearinghouse querying plans can only be purchased by somebody that's an employer. TPAs and MROs and substance abuse professionals cannot purchase querying plans for you.
Can DriverCheck register a company with the clearinghouse?
So the question is, can DriverCheck register a company for the clearinghouse on their behalf? Well, answer is no, unfortunately, and we, trust me, DriverCheck really wanted to help clients with this, but again, the way the FMCSA set it up is that employers have to independently register themselves for the clearinghouse and then assign DriverCheck in the clearinghouse. So we can help you to register in the sense that we can give you guidance. You can give us a call. You can give your client support team a call, and we can help you walk through the steps on how to register, but we can't actually register for you on your behalf. You have to do it, but we'll give you guidance, and we'll kind of hold your hand through the process.
Are positive pre-employment tests reported to Clearinghouse? Are positive pre-employment drug tests reported to Clearinghouse?
Yes, so positive pre-employment drug tests are reported to the Clearinghouse so long as they're done in a DOT capacity. So if you did a DOT pre-employment drug test and there's a positive test result, it has to be reported into Clearinghouse. And because it's a drug test result, the MRO is going to be expected to do that. And just so you know, MROs will be reporting all drug test results. All positive drug test results. And it doesn't matter what the employer says about that. The MRO's obligation is to report it. Now, for if there happens to be a pre-employment DOT drug test, the employer will be expected to report that. So there's a little bit of a distinction there, a little bit of separation of duties. Employers responsible for alcohol tests, and the MRO responsible for drug tests.
It's $1.75 for each driver per month from DriverCheck. Is that over and above the $1.25 yearly limit to query?
So the $1.75 per month per driver is what DriverCheck charges, and it's in addition to the $1.25 that the FMCSA charges. Now the FMCSA is charging $1.25 US per query. So the per query is not a monthly charge. If you're only doing 50 queries, the FMCSA is only going to charge you $1.25 for those 50 queries. And then DriverCheck's going to charge you $1.75 times those 50 drivers per month.
Does an employer have until January 5th, 2021 to conduct their first annual limited query?
So yes, they do. You've got 1 year to do the query. So technically, because the clearinghouse doesn't come effective till January 6th, you would actually have till January 5th, 2021 to do a query. But we're hopefully going to do it much in advance. We don't want any one of our clients waiting till the 11th hour to be doing this. We don't want you caught off guard, especially when you get into January with things like New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, and people on vacation. You don't want to wait till the holiday time and you're putting yourself into a time crunch.
For owner-operators that run under a company's DOT, but they have their own truck and operate as an owner-operator, are the owner-operators or drivers still under the company's clearinghouse or their own?
So if they're working for you, and I think I kind of touched on this a minute ago, if they're working for you, even though they got their own truck, if you're the company sending them for drug tests and random selections, if they get a positive while you sent them for a drug test, it's going to fall under your obligation to report it because you're the one that ordered the test. You're the one that knows the results and has the results in hand. So I hope that clears it out. And just so you know, if it's a drug test, an MRO is going to report it no matter what. They don't. The MRO, medical review officer, doesn't make a distinction between an owner-operator or somebody that's just a driver. The MRO, all they care about is a positive drug test result, and that's what's going to get reported. So I hope that clears it up. All right, so that concludes the presentation, and I hope that answers your questions and gets you to start thinking about the clearinghouse.